What makes a good WoW villain and what makes a bad WoW villain? Those are the things I want to talk about today on Crendor Talks in front of a shitty green screen. So, we've had a lot of WoW villains through the years, right? Some of them very good, some bad, some okay, right? And I wanted to talk about why the good ones are so good and why the bad ones are just so bad, like just terrible. And so, the other day, well, I guess the other week at this point, I made a poll on YouTube and I asked people who was the best WoW villain, and 80% said the Lich King, Arthas, right? Then we had, 7% say Illidan and Garrosh. We had 4% say Deathwing. And then we had a bunch of others, people saying Lei Shen from Pandaria. We had people saying Onyxia, which actually I learned a decent amount about Onyxia, and it's actually pretty true. She was actually a pretty cool villain. Someone said Professor Putricide, Edwin Van Cleef, right? There Gul'dan. There's a whole bunch of villains from World of Warcraft, right? But nobody said the Jailer, and nobody said Sylvanas, right? Those are two that I did not see really at all going through all of these other comments. We had some Kill Jadens, just really impressive how nobody, that there was actually one person that said the Jailer, but it was a troll post. So let's talk first about why the Jailer is so bad, because I feel like to know what makes a good WoW villain, we first need to know what makes a bad WoW villain. And really, this is just a lot of writing in general. Like, a lot of this is just what makes a good villain in movies or stories or games, like whatever it might be, right? And so, to me, after just reading about the Jailer and learning about the Jailer and playing through the game and seeing the Jailer and experiencing everything, he just felt to me like a shitty Sauron. That's like my best way to put it, right? He even has like the eye, like his eye is watching, but it's not even like that cool of an eye compared to Sauron. And he's like, I'm very smart, like nothing escapes the maw, right? Even though things do keep escaping the maw, and like he has no buildup. And that's really the main point I want to talk about here is the buildup, because other characters have build up to their story, right? Like they have, whether that's Warcraft 3, you're building up, or you have, a full expansion of building up a character. The Shadowlands really never felt like it built up the Jailer. It almost felt like it built up Sylvanas, and then it stopped, and then it was the Jailer, and then it was like I never really even understood who was the bad guy. They were like, no, but he's the bad guy. And then you're like, okay, but I don't feel like he is. You know what I mean? And I feel like he's just the classic Dark Lord trope. He's the Dark Lord trope from fantasy, but like the bad version, where he's just like, I'm a bad guy, right? I'm a bad guy and I do bad things. And you're like, okay, you got some examples? And he's like, oh, I'm just this random guy that appeared from this random place you've never heard about. But I'm responsible for everything bad that's happened since like Legion, or like, like the Lich King. That was me. I did that. And you're like, no, because like I played through that, and that's not. He's like, no, you got it wrong. I did it. And you're like, okay, cool. So I guess everything that I learned about is just retconned, and it makes no sense because you said so. And he's like, yep. And then, to make it even worse, right? The shitty Sauron does all these things, and he's not even good at it. And then at the end, he's like, you thought I was the bad guy. You thought I was the worst guy because I told you I was the worst guy. You don't even know who's controlling me. And you're just like, dude, first off, I don't even know if I believe you. I don't even know if there's anybody controlling you. Second off, I just don't care. Right? Like, why should I care? I don't even want to be here. It's just, there's so many things wrong with it. It's hard to even like describe all the bad things wrong, but I get those are just kind of my generic observations, right? He says he's evil, and so he's evil. He's just a really shitty Dark Lord trope. That's really all it's bad writing. Which leads me to our next example, which is Sylvanas, because she's also tied into this, and I feel like some people are actually a little bit more upset with Sylvanas because it feels more like her character is out of place. But what isn't out of place is the channel sponsor, Zygor. You can get WoW leveling guides, pet and mount collection guides, gold making guides, and more, all with Zygor. And you can check it out for free using the link in the description down below. And if you enjoy it, you can use code Crendor for 20% off the Elite subscription. I used Zygor just the other week for the Midsummer Fire Festival, and it made it all extremely easy. Again, use code Crendor for 20% off an Elite subscription and check it out for free in the description below. The story of Sylvanas, you know, if anybody doesn't really know, is essentially Arthas kills her and then brings her back to life as a banshee, and she wants revenge, right? She's like, I hate Arthas. Her whole purpose is, I want Arthas to die. Like, she wants to kill Arthas. That's it, right? That's her motivation. And so you're like, okay, that's understandable, right? Like, he killed her. He brings her back as a banshee. She's like, this sucks. I want to kill him, right? Like, okay. And then Arthas dies, and then she's like, okay, well, cool. I got no purpose in life now because I'm like a banshee after all this. Like, this sucks, but like, he's dead. Like, Arthas is dead. So she's like, you know what? I'm done. And she jumps off the Ice Crown Citadel and tries to kill herself. And then she goes to the Maw, and she's like, yo, super hell, the Maw sucks. I want to get out of here. Which, to be fair, I too wanted to get out of the Maw. When I was in the Maw, it was a terrible experience. I was like, get me out of here. I didn't even want to go back. So I understand that, you know, I can relate after being there. And then she makes this pact with the Valkyr to stay alive and not go back to the Maw, and then to protect the Forsaken, which is, I guess, I don't even really understand that. I guess she's just like, these are my people. Like, you know, we're all forsaken and messed up by Arthas and, you know, all the Forsaken stuff, right? So that was her thing. And I feel like that was like a pretty decent point for her to like start going downhill, right? Like, okay, this is her storyline. We're like, we peaked here. She killed Arthas, and now we start going down until she's gone. But it almost feels like they went like up, and then they're just like, wait, maybe we make her a like primary villain, and then like, no, I don't want to. Well, maybe she's like the big. No, she's not. And then like it was like a roller coaster, you know what I mean? And then she just starts doing like all this out of character stuff. She starts going insane. She's like, let's just burn the tree, right? Like, and screw the horde, like, you know. And you're just like, wait, what? You know, it's one of those things where she starts doing so much stuff out of character, and so much starts happening so fast. There's not enough time to even get that build up. Like, she's another character where she's been around since Warcraft 3, right? So you have to see her, you know, kind of evolve over the RTS game and the expansions and classic WoW. And like, she's like, hey, you know, you're an undead. I'm the leader of the Forsaken. Welcome to the Undercity. And you're like, oh, hey, cool, Sylvanas. And then, right. And then all this stuff. And then all of a sudden it's just like, blah, 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 blah. And everything just gets jumbled. There's no slow buildup. Right. And I think that is the biggest problem of those two characters, is just no buildup and just out of character. You know, the character that you knew just starts changing rapidly, right? And you can expect her to change somewhat because you're like, oh, she went to the Maw and, you know, she died, and now she's like, I've seen some shit, I don't want to go there, whatever. So like, I could understand that, right? Like, okay, but it takes some turns and twists that you're just like, this doesn't make a lot of sense. It starts feeling like her character morphs to the story that they want to tell, and less like the story morphs to her actual actions that she would realistically do, right? Because that tends to happen with a lot of stories and movies and stuff like that, is you start initially almost like Game of Thrones a little bit, where the characters are just being themselves, and then they kind of run out of ideas or they're like, I don't know how to really work with this, or like make this work and whatever. And then they're like, what if she just starts being a little bit like this? Or like, what if the story, you know, and then all of a sudden you're like, that doesn't seem like something that character would do, but okay. And then it just keeps nosediving, right? And you get that a little bit with Janna as well, right? Where it, like when she goes crazy, you're like, I don't know if Janna would really go that crazy, but all right, whatever. And you know, when it starts happening so often, that's when people just start being like, yo, this sucks, right? And that's why I think a lot of people like even one-off villains, like Lei Shen as a good example. Someone said he wasn't around long, but he was memorable. And I think that's a pretty big lesson to learn if you're writing these villains in World of Warcraft or video games or whatever. Like, you know, I remember him, right? You're like, oh, that was a cool villain from that expansion. And then we moved on. And that's fine, right? He was a memorable villain. He was cool. He had like he had lightning and shit. You're like, all right, cool. And then we killed him. You're like, all right. And so then we get to Arthas. And what makes Arthas a good villain? In fact, you know what? Before we get to Arthas, I want to talk about the old gods a bit, because I just remembered. The old gods are this other thing. I want to talk about the scale of enemies, right? So back in classic WoW, we have the humans and the dragons and the orcs and the wizards, right? Very like fantasy-based stuff, right? And you're like, okay, we got the dragons and like all this stuff's happening. You're like, okay, cool, whatever, right? It's all based within the world of Warcraft. It feels like there's all these little stories and some are connecting in ways. And it almost feels like there's like this political thing, like Onyxia is like, you know, infiltrating Stormwind and like manipulating stuff. And then you got like Nefarian over in Blackwing Lair, and he's manipulating stuff, right? There's like all this manipulation and these dragon things going on. And you're like, okay, whatever. Then you start getting into like Burning Crusade, and there's like demons and there's aliens and there's like all this crazy. And you're like, all right, you know, like it's getting a little crazier, but like, all right, I can understand it, right? We're still in fantasy and all that stuff. Then you start learning more about like the old gods, which to me, I think the old gods are one of the coolest things Blizzard has done, because I'm a big like psychological thriller mystery type of thing and trying to figure out why things are the way they are in the world building, because I just love world building. It's why I love exploring. It's why I like Pointless Top 10 and finding all the little things out in the world. And I love when people find like all these secrets and all these little things, right? And so the old gods are just a perfect example of that, right? You're like, oh, these old gods, nobody really knows that much about them, but like they're whispering to people, they're manipulating stuff, they've been around like forever, they're like in the world, they're underneath the world, they're like, you know, leaking out in the it's like crazy shit like Yogg-Saron, and you're like, this is awesome. And I think those things are best left untouched, right? I feel like we don't need to fight old gods, or if we do fight old gods, I think in a way like Yogg-Saron is a good way to do it, right? Like he's been manipulating and controlling everything, and then you finally fight him, and then he's just like, I gotta get out of here, right? But like, I thought that was done well. But an example of that done terribly is N'Zoth at the end of BFA, where N'Zoth is like one of the old gods that's like been talked about forever, like since classic WoW. He's been responsible for some of the craziest shit that's happened in WoW, and all of a sudden he's just like, oh hey guys, I'm here in a raid and I'm dead. See ya. And you're like, what? Like, I still don't think that's how we killed N'Zoth. I'm like, I hope it's not how we killed N'Zoth, because it doesn't make any sense. Like, why would this guy, who's one of the strongest old gods ever, I guess he's like actually one of the weaker old gods, but still, he's an old god, and he's just killed off like nothing? And they're like, oh, well, BFA was supposed to be his big expansion. Well, why didn't he have like an overarching theme behind it? It felt more like Jaina was Jaina, and like all this stuff happening with her was more important than N'Zoth. N'Zoth should have been like the thing. And so it's like the scale of enemies starts becoming a little over exaggerated, or like to the point where right now we're going into space and we're fighting Sargeras, we're fighting old gods, and we're killing them like they're nothing. And to me, I don't like that. Like, I would prefer we just never interacted with them, or we do like in little ways, or it's like, oh, you're fighting the vision of N'Zoth and it's not actually him because he's too powerful, you'd get shit on, right? I think that's fine. But when you actually start fighting these people, like the dude's like wiping out planets, okay? They're like, Sargeras like destroys planets, and we go up there and we're like, hey, we're gonna kill you, we did it. And you're like, what? Like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, I don't understand. That's one of the reasons I was never a big fan of all those fights and stuff. Like, they're okay, but I don't get it from like a writing storytelling perspective. I think it waters down a lot of stuff, and I think that's a big problem. It waters down the power level. It's almost like when you start giving people epics when they're not epic, right? That whole argument from back in the day. everything just starts getting watered down. The epics feel less epic. The legendaries feel less legendary because you're getting legendaries. You're getting epics, right? But you're killing the legendaries now. Like, you're killing gods like they're nothing. And I think that's not good. That's bad. And I think that's one of the reasons I've really enjoyed that they've went back to the roots in Dragonflight, where you're just like, yeah, you know what? We're fighting dragons again, right? We're fighting the elements. And I'm like, this is cool. Like, it just feels more realistic and fantasy based and normal instead of just this crazy hyper powered old god, or not even old god, but just like, you know, super powerful beings and death beings and stuff. And then we just kill them like they're nothing anyway. So it's like, well, that didn't really matter. You know, like, there's no buildup. But anyway, that was my side tangent a little bit. But now we get to Arthas, right? So we're talking about Arthas, and we're talking about the Lich King. And this kind of ties in with N'Zoth, actually, a little bit. And why is Arthas so cool? Like, why do people love it? Well, one is because we have that buildup, right? So we start with Arthas in Warcraft 3, and he's just this paladin who's like training up, right? He's like, it's the Darth Vader, right? He's just like, I want to be a Jedi. I want to be a paladin, right? And then he starts going through this path of like, oh man, do I have to kill these people, or should I like not kill them because they're infected, but they're gonna, you know, all this shit's gonna happen. So he's just like, I gotta make the choice I'm gonna make. And then people are like, what are you doing, Arthas? But it's like, dude, this is a tough decision, right? Like, I don't know. It's very like, it becomes gray area where you're like, I don't know. I think that's a good villain writing. It's almost like where you understand where that person's coming from, but you're like, they're insane, right? Where there could be like a villain who's like an evil druid in the forest, and he's like, I started, you know, killing everyone because they killed animals, and like, I love the animals, and I'll protect the animals, and I'll kill anyone who it's like, all right, you're going a little crazy there, but you kind of see where he's coming from. You're like, all right, I understand, but he's insane. Right? And I think you understand their motives. And I think the motive is the big thing. Like, what is the jailer's motive? He's like, I'm evil and I want to be evil and control stuff. Like, that's not a motive. That's just a general idea of like, I want power. Like, I think that's one of the shittiest motives you can have, right? Like, there has to be something behind that, right? So, and like, Arthas is doing all this stuff because of like vengeance, right? Like, he hates Mal'Ganis. He wants to kill Mal'Ganis because Mal'Ganis is doing all this stuff to him, right? It's actually been a while since I played Warcraft 3. So all I remember is like Mal'Ganis is like taunting him and stuff, and he's like, I'll get you, Mal'Ganis, right? And so that vengeance kind of gets to his head, and they're like, Arthas, like, you gotta calm down, go crazy. And then he's like, yeah, I'll do whatever it takes. Like, that's when he wants Frost more, and like, he starts betraying his people more, right? Because of Mal'Ganis. That vengeance is like inside of him, and you're like, damn, this guy's going crazy. But I kind of get it, right? And so I think once you play through that, especially, like, you get to experience that yourself by playing as Arthas. So you have this attachment to Arthas already, right? And I think that's where it begins. So you go through all this story, you learn about Arthas, you see his choices he makes, you actually make the choices with him, and then you play through all that, and by the end of it, you're just like, damn, this shit's crazy, right? And then that's it, and you're like, all right, see you later. And, you know, it almost ends on a cliffhanger, like, I guess he goes crazy. I don't know what happens to Arthas. And then we get to Wrath of the Lich King, and it's like, here's Arthas, and you're like, oh shit, like, I guess we get to continue the story that we were learning about, right? Because you've built up to this. Like, we know what's happened with Arthas. We're building up to this point, and then you go into the expansion, you're in Northrend, and you're like, damn, like, this is what Arthas is built from being here for so long, right? You see the way his power is kind of taken over the land and Northrend, and everybody is impacted by Arthas. People know the Lich King. Wherever you go, people talk about the Lich King, or like, you know, you still have your little things going on here and there, like side quests, or whatever, but for the most part, everybody is like, yeah, Arthas, right? And so it's crazy because you have all this build up, and then you go to the expansion, and you have all this build up from the expansion and leveling through it, and then you get the ICC, and then you go through the raid, and that builds up, and then you finally fight the Lich King, and it's like, boom, right? And I think that is why you had so many people come back, because they're like, they're halfway through the story. You know, it feels like you were reading an unfinished book, and now the new book came out and you're like, oh shit, the new book. And then you read through the new book by playing the new expansion, and then you did it. You beat Arthas, and it's like, all right, cool. And that's why the player base also just hit the peak at that point, and then was like, you know, because the story's complete. And so now that doesn't mean that Warcraft 3 is the only way that you can tell a story, right? But I think that shows the power of building up a character and building up a villain, and not just like forcing that character to be something they aren't, but allowing them to kind of go through the path and see like the choices they make. And like it's just character growth. But you know, obviously there's character growth for the villains and character growth for the hero. Like there's two types, right? And so I think at the end of the day, at the more, you know, overall, I think it is very easy to see why some characters are, you know, beloved even as villains, and some characters are hated, whether it's they're hated because of, you know, things in the game and choices they made in the game. Like, oh, I hate this character. It's one thing to hate a character because of how they act in the game and who they are, whatever. And it's another reason to hate a character because they are written terribly. And I think the Jailer is actually a little bit of both. And I think that's why everyone hates him, right? I really do. I think the Jailer is just, he's really just the worst villain, maybe one of the worst villains in just any media I've seen. It's impressive. But I even saw someone here on my post on the YouTube thing say Arthas had the best character development, and that made him the most relatable, I think. They said, I also have a soft spot for Deathwing. If they had lent deeper into the slow, painful descent into madness of a once noble and responsible person, I think his story would have touched people more than the bombastic, one-dimensional, I am Deathwing, destroyer of worlds. And I think that they actually made a good point, right? When I think of Deathwing, I think of like, oh, he's just flying around burning shit, and like, hey, don't do that, Deathwing. But I feel like they really could have went more into the, you know, the mind games and descend into madness of Deathwing. And I think that would have been much more interesting to see from a gameplay perspective, and have that be built up over time, and then, you know, finally getting to all the Deathwing fights and stuff like that. Like, I think Blizzard really, I think they're getting better at it. They're getting better at it as of Dragonflight, but I think they really struggled for a long time with that build-up, you know. And they used to have Warcraft 3 to assist you with it, but then that obviously wasn't a thing anymore. So let me know down in the comments section, what do you think about all this? Because I am curious. Those are just kind of the observations I made along the way, but let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments section below. So thank you for watching, listening, like, comment, subscribe. And also, if you want to see some other videos, we got pointless top 10s, we got WoW rants, we got a whole bunch of stuff right up here. You can check them all out. Also, thank you again to Zygor, the channel sponsor. Use code Crendor for 20% off an elite subscription with Zygor. Okay? Okay. See ya.